Once upon a time, there lived a man whose name was Abu Nowas. Now, Abu Nowas was a great favorite of the Sultan of the country in which he lived, for it seems that Abu Nowas had been the Sultan's favorite jester for many, many years. As a matter of fact, Abu Nowas had been given to the Sultan on the occasion of the Sultan's first birthday in order that he might keep the young Sultan entertained and amused throughout his childhood, and that's exactly what Abu Nowas had done. He had kept the young Sultan entertained and amused throughout his childhood, and Abu Nowas had been able to help the young Sultan to learn some of the things that his teachers had been unable to teach him, and Abu Nowas often used to take the young Sultan in disguise to many of the places where he was forbidden to go. So, by the time the Sultan had come of age, by the time he was old enough to take over the reins of power of his country, why, he and Abu Nowas had become great friends, and so the Sultan had kept Abu Nowas on as his jester for many, many years after that, until the time came when Abu Nowas had grown quite old. By now, Abu Nowas was somewhere in his 60s, and by now the Sultan was somewhere in his 40s, and at about this time a new jester had come into the Sultan's court, and this new jester was very talented at dancing and singing and juggling, and these were all things that Abu Nowas himself could not do, and so the Sultan had taken this opportunity to retire old Abu Nowas, and he had hired on this new jester. Although Abu Nowas was still in good favor with the Sultan, so much so that the Sultan had bought Abu Nowas a small house on the outskirts of the city, and so you see, Abu Nowas and the Sultan still lived in the same city, although Abu Nowas now lived in the small, poor, simple house, while the Sultan still lived in the grand and glorious palace. But up till now, that's all been exposition. As our story begins, one day, the wife of Abu Nowas died. And Abu Nowas went to the palace of the Sultan, and with tears in his eyes, he walked into the hall of justice where the Sultan was sitting, and he said, "Oh, mighty Sultan, my wife is dead." "Oh, that is too bad," said the Sultan. "Well then, we must get you another wife." And the Sultan told his servant, whose name was Sahid, to go and fetch the Sultana, who was, of course, the Sultan's wife. And when the Sultana arrived, the Sultan said to her, "This poor Abu Nowas has lost his wife." "Oh, that is too bad," said the Sultana. "Well, then, we must get him another wife. I have a girl who will suit him exactly." And she clapped her hands loudly, and at that signal a fair young maiden came and stood before them. "I've got a husband for you," said the Sultana. "Who is he?" asked the girl. "'Tis Abu Nowas, the jester," said the Sultana. "Well, then, I shall take him," said the girl, and as Abu Nowas made no objections, it was all arranged. Now, the Sultana bought the bride a beautiful new wedding dress, and the Sultan paid for the bridegroom's wedding suit, and the Sultan gave them 1,000 pieces of gold into the bargain, along with soft carpets for the house. And so Abu Nowas took his new wife home, and for some time they were very happy, and they spent the money freely, which the Sultan had given them, never thinking what to do for more when that had gone. But come to an end it finally did, and they had to sell all of their fine things one by one until there was nothing left except for one cloak apiece and one blanket to cover them over with. And Abu Nowas turned to his wife and he said, "Oh, we have run through our fortune. What are we to do now? I cannot go back to the palace of the Sultan. The Sultan has already hired on a new jester. Oh, but you, wife, you are still in good favor with the Sultana. Go to the palace of the Sultana and throw yourself at her feet and beg and weep. Perhaps she would give us something." "Oh, no," said the wife. "I would not know what to say. You had much better go." "Oh, very well, then," said Abu Nowas. "But I shall go to the palace of the Sultan, and I shall tell the Sultan... Oh, I'll tell the Sultan that we're couldn't tell the Sultan that. I know. I'll tell the Sultan that you are dead, and that I have no money to pay for your funeral. Well, then he'll have to give us something. Oh, yes, said the wife, that seems like a good idea. And so Abu Nowas left his house, and he went once again to the palace of the Sultan. And when he arrived there, the Sultan was once again sitting in his hall of justice, and Abu Nowas entered the room with his eyes streaming with tears. You see, he had rubbed some pepper into them. They smarted dreadfully. He could hardly see to walk straight. Everyone wondered what was the matter with him, and the Sultan said, "Abu Nowas, what has happened?" And Abu Nowas said, "Oh, mighty Sultan, my new wife is dead too." "Oh, that is too bad," said the Sultan. "But we must all die." But that's not the answer that Abu Nowas had hoped for, so he went on to say, "Yes, but before she died, she sold all of my things, and she spent all of my money, and now I don't have enough left even to buy her a shroud, far less pay for her burial." And the Sultan told his servant Sahid to give Abu Nowas 100 pieces of gold. And after the money had been counted out, Abu Nowas left the palace with tears in his eyes, but with joy in his heart. And when he arrived at home, his wife said to him, "Well, have you got anything?" And Abu Nowas threw his purse down on the table, and he said, "Yes, I have 100 pieces of gold. But that shall not last us long. You know how we are, wife." Oh, but it was a wonderful plan. It worked splendidly. In fact, now I think about it, it worked so well, I think that we should try it again. Now, you, wife, go to the palace of the Sultana and tell her that I am dead and that you have no money to pay for my funeral. Well, then she'll give us something too. And so the wife of Abu Nowas left the house, and she went to the palace of the Sultana, which, it probably should be mentioned, was separate from the palace of the Sultan. And when she arrived there, she was admitted without much difficulty into the private apartments, since she had been known to have been one of the Sultana's favorite attendants. And the Sultana, upon seeing the poor girl in tears, said, "Oh, my dear, what has happened?" And the wife said, "Oh, my husband, Abu Nowas, lies dead at home, and before he died, he sold all of our things, and he spent all of my money, and now I don't have enough left to pay for his funeral." And the Sultana took up a purse containing 200 gold coins, and she gave it to the wife of Abu Nowas, saying, "Here, you must see to it that your husband has a fine funeral. He served us both long and faithfully." And the wife of Abu Nowas knelt down, she kissed the feet of the Sultana, and then she joyfully hastened home. Well, later on that evening, after the Sultan had finished with all of his sultanly duties, he went to pay his usual nightly visit to the palace of the Sultana, and when he arrived there, the Sultana said to the Sultan, "Oh, poor Abu Nowas is dead." "No, no, no, no," said the Sultan. "'Tis not Abu Nowas who is dead. It's only his wife who is dead." "Oh, you're quite mistaken," said the Sultana. "For I spoke with his wife today, and she was not dead at all. But she told me that her husband, Abu Nowas, was quite dead, and that before he had died, he had sold all of her things, spent all of her money, so I had to give her a little something to tide her over with." "You must have been dreaming," said the Sultan. "For I spoke with Abu Nowas only this morning, and Abu Nowas told me that his wife was dead, and that before she had died, she had sold all of his things, spent all of his money. Why, The silly fool told me he had not enough left even to buy her a shroud, far less pay for her burial, so I had to give Abu Nowas 100 pieces of gold. Well, for a long time they argued back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Neither would listen to the other. Until finally, the Sultan called for his servant Sahid. And the Sultan said to his servant Sahid, "Sahid, something suspicious. I want you to go to the house of Abu Nowas and find out which of the two of them is dead, either the husband or the wife, and as soon as you have found out, come back here and let us know." And so the Sultan's servant Sahid left the palace of the Sultana, and he ran off in the direction of the house of Abu Nowas. Well, Abu Nowas was at home at the time, and he was sitting behind a latticed window which looked out over the street, and so he saw the Sultan's servant Sahid approaching his house. And Abu Nowas called out to his wife, saying, "Wife, look! There is the Sultan's servant, Sahid! The Sultan must have sent him here to find out the truth, and the Sultan must believe that you are dead. Quickly, lie down upon the bed and pretend that you're dead." And so the wife of Abu Nowas ran over to the bed. She lay down upon the bed. Abu Nowas pulled the blanket over her face, and he rubbed a little more pepper into his eyes, and then he stood at the head of the bed crying. And just at that moment, the Sultan's servant Sahid came in through the front door, and seeing Abu Nowas in tears, he said, "Abu Nowas, what has happened?" And Abu Nowas said, "Oh, Sahid, my wife is dead." And the Sultan's servant Sahid approached the bed. He pulled back the blanket. He saw that the wife of Abu Nowas did indeed look quite dead, and so he put the blanket back and he said, "Oh, that is too bad, but we must all die." And then he ran back to the palace of the Sultana. And when he arrived there, the Sultan said to him, "Well, what have you found out?" And the Sultan's servant Sahid said, "Oh, mighty Sultan, it is the wife who is dead." Well, now the Sultan, upon hearing that, was pleased, but the Sultana was outraged. She shouted out, "Why, he only says that to please you!" And the Sultana called for her chamberlain, whose name was Charles. And the Sultana told her chamberlain Charles to go to the house of Abu Nowas to find out which of the two of them was really dead. "And be sure you tell the truth about it," said she, "or it will be the worse for you." And so the Sultana's chamberlain Charles left the palace of the Sultana, and he ran off in the direction of the house of Abu Nowas. Well, Abu Nowas was still at home, and once again he was sitting behind the latticed window which looked out over the street, and so he saw the Sultana's chamberlain Charles approaching the house. And Abu Nowas called out to his wife, saying, "Wife, look! There is the Sultana's chamberlain, Charles! The Sultana must have sent him here to find out the truth, and the Sultana must believe that I am dead. Quickly, pull the blanket over me. It's my turn to die now." And Abu Nowas ran over to the bed. He lay down upon the bed. His wife pulled the blanket over his face, and she stood at the head of the bed crying. She didn't need any pepper. And just at that moment, the Sultana's chamberlain Charles peeked in through the front window, and seeing the wife of Abu Nowas, who was well known to him, standing there very much in tears, but nonetheless very much alive, he assumed that, well, since that was the wife who was standing there alive, well, then that must be Abu Nowas who was lying there dead. And so, without even going into the house, he ran back to the palace of the Sultana. And when he arrived there, the Sultan said to him, "Well, what have you found out?" And the Sultana's chamberlain Charles said, "Oh, mighty Sultan, it is Abu Nowas who is dead." And the Sultan shouted out, "But I tell you, he was with me only a few hours ago. I shall not sleep until I get to the bottom of this. Have my golden coach be brought round at once." And within 5 minutes, the Sultan's golden coach was brought round to the front door. The Sultan got in, the Sultana got in along with him, and they sped off in the direction of the house of Abu Nowas. Well, by now, Abu Nowas had ceased being a dead man, and he was once again sitting behind the latticed window which looked out over the street, and so he saw the Sultan's golden coach approaching his house. And Abu Nowas called out to his wife, saying, "Wife, look! The Sultan shall be here directly, and we must both be dead to receive him." And so they both ran over to the bed. They both lay down upon the bed. They pulled the blanket over their faces. And just at that moment, the Sultan came in through the front door, followed by the Sultana, followed by the Sultan's servant Sahib, followed by the Sultana's chamberlain Charles. And the Sultan approached the bed, and upon finding both bodies lying there stiff and motionless, he shouted out, "Why, I would give 1,000 gold pieces to anyone who would tell me the truth about this." Whereupon Abu Nowas sprang up. He held out his hand and he said, "Then give them to me, for there is no one who needs them more." And the Sultan shouted out, "Why, Abu Nowas, you impudent dog! I should have known it was one of your tricks." And the Sultan burst into laughter, and the Sultana joined him in that laughter, for although the Sultan's new jester was very talented at dancing and singing and juggling, he never did have the knack for practical jokes that old Abu Nowas had always had, and the Sultan was so pleased to have had his old jester make him laugh one last time that he did indeed send Abu Nowas the 1,000 pieces of gold he had promised him. And as if that were not enough, he allowed Abu Nowas to keep the 100 pieces of gold for his wife's funeral and the 200 pieces of gold for his own funeral. And Abu Nowas did not squander this money foolishly. No, he invested it in some very clever schemes, and after a couple of years, Abu Nowas and his wife had become very wealthy thereby. And so Abu Nowas and his wife, until the day they died again, both lived happily ever after.